Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Revolution of Being. This is episode 2 of our 5-part series where we're going to be deconstructing the ego. So, on this episode, we're going to talk about identifying the ego's patterns and strategies. So, you just kind of get more attuned to understanding when the ego's driving the car, when it's taking control, and again, just furthering that ability to tap into your meta awareness. So the ego is this clever little subtle thing that's often invisible, and we don't know the ego until we start doing this work. We just really think this is who we are. And that was what I thought. I was this anxious little person who, had all these characteristics when really it was ego. So it's a really kind of invisible thing until we learn to recognize those patterns. So this week, we're going to really shine light on how the ego shows up in our everyday light. So again, you can just get more attuned to when it's taken main
Yeah.
stage.
All right. So to start off with just something to think about, have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling a sort of tightness in your chest, or you've been ruminating and playing that conversation over and over in your head? What should I have said? Maybe how they misunderstood you, why you felt dismissed. All of those little voices, that's the ego talking. So let's just shift that because we all know that feeling. We've all felt that before. And let's just ask, what if that discomfort that we feel in those moments isn't the problem, but instead it's a portal?
Yeah, and it's such a good one to go into. And this is one of my favorite topics. Again, I love talking about the ego because it's just a tricky little bastard.
It,
And so the ego really wants to stay in control. It wants to feel safe and it wants to avoid shame at all costs. So, does that sound like a bratty little child to you? Because I'm like, man, like when you say that out loud, it's just like this terrified little, or maybe even like a chihuahua. You know how they're like so vicious and angry, but they're just these tiny little helpless things. And so the ego is kind of like a little chihuahua and some of its go to strategies. So when you think about, okay, how do I identify ego versus like my true self? The ego is the part of you that wants to be right all the time. And I don't know about you, but I know some people that, holy heck, man, they will argue until they're blue in the face to be right. And it's just like insane to see the shift. Um, the ego also wants to be approved. Again, we've talked about that needing to fit into the crowd for safety purposes. So it wants to seek approval. It will defend yourself. Even if nobody's attacking you, the ego will be like, well, you were right to tell that person off in the Starbucks line because they were being a jerk. Yeah, you were. Yeah, maybe it wasn't the nice, like, spiritual thing to do, but they sure deserved it. And the ego like wants to defend those actions to not, again, not let you feel that shame. And it is comparing constantly. I don't know about you all, but my Lord, when I look on social media, my little ego goes crazy because it sees these beautiful women with flawless skin that are like in their 40s and doing all this stuff. And my little ego's like, well, why aren't you doing that? Maybe you should have some more Botox, or maybe you should like do something different with your hair. Or hey, there are these new shots that will promise you everlasting life. Maybe you should do that. And there's like all these little thoughts that go through my head. And like we laugh because I don't know about you, but it happens all the damn time. And you and I are aware of this happening. And my heart hurts for those who don't understand. Like all of that stuff. Any marketing is marketing to your ego. It makes you want to feel like you're missing out. You need more of something, or you need to be less of something else. So, anyways, that's all ego. And then competing. Oh boy. So I see this too. And I don't know, Jess, especially I feel like those on the spiritual awakening path, we can be just as toxic. There can be that spiritual ego of, well, I'm awake and the rest of you guys are sheeple. I see that so much and my little ego gets triggered because I'm like, that's not the point. But I recognize it's my ego also being triggered in response to that, right? So it's kind of this funny little game. But, or even when I was growing up in the church, I would see people that were just so righteous, because they had God in their pocket and all these things and they've been saved and baptized and whatever. And that's all ego. Ego wants to prove it's better than other people. It's better than the next person. You're more right than they are. Your spirituality is a better way than theirs is. Or even parenting styles, right? So we can get judgy McJudgerson about how people are, you know, throwing their kids in front of tablets all day. No, I don't agree with that personally, but, whatever, to each their own, or different ways of, homeschooling versus regular schooling, all these things. Like we do it as parents as well, judging each other for all that stuff. The ego will also avoid vulnerability. So it doesn't want to talk about the hard stuff. I know, like some of the stuff I've been through, my ego has blocked off some vulnerability in certain aspects of my life. It's very, very hard for me um, to open up in certain areas. Now it's getting better. In the last year or two, it's gotten a lot better for me, but I definitely know that some parts are very protected and closed, and that it's a conscious effort right now to reopen those. And my favorite one is the ego loves to play victim. Loves it. So it's their fault that I got fired from this job. It's their fault that I got a speeding ticket. You don't understand, they were the ones that were being mean to me, or the government's the reason I'm poor, or, so and so is tanking the stock market, thereby my portfolio. Oh my gosh. And we see it all the time. And it's all ego. Ego wants to believe everybody else is at fault, and it's nothing to do with our choices. And it's just when you again kind of look at it from a 5,000-foot view, it's comical. Like it's very comical how childlike the ego is. But again, these aren't bad. Like these were all things that got you to where you are. So it's just now that they're outdated. It's like your Mac computer needing an upgrade, like, okay, the Mac iOS 10 is no longer working. We need like 15 now because we're rapidly, evolving. And so we can look at those things with, again, kind of the innocence of a child. They've been used to protect you. They're just not working anymore. So when you're ready to step out of them, that's when the real transformation happens. So, it's again, it kind of slows you down, but when you notice it and you begin to understand how the machine works, that's where the power really comes back in. And that's, what I hope some of these prompts will kind of help you reflect on, and maybe rewind this and listen again. Like, what areas do I play the victim? What areas am I comparing myself to others? What areas, am I looking for approval or wanting to be right? I know in my relationship, man, if you're with a partner or somebody who is deeply close to you, they are one of the biggest triggers of your ego, because you're safe, and you can do that. And oof, when we both get into our stuff and we are in our ego, the fierceness of wanting to be right is insane. And I've learned to drop things very quickly because I just don't care to argue. but but it's, you get triggered. And so your partners, your closest friends, family, loved ones are also great reflections of where your points are with which you could work.
Yeah. The
So
other side of it is, what is the story that we live in? We are the author of our own story. So that is the individual experience we're having. And then we're just hiring the cast and writing the plot and all that stuff. It puts a great deal of responsibility on us. But the ego is going to create these narratives that give us an identity and stability. And a lot of them are unconscious. They're inherited. Like you said in an earlier podcast, these are things that we received from our upbringing at times. And that's okay. This is the experience of life. But a lot of those narratives are simply stories we've written, and we just keep playing them out because it's part of the ego's identity. It's what the ego wants us to believe because it's familiar. So some of these common ego narratives end up being, I'm not good enough. I deal with this a ton in the business world. This is such a huge thing for most people. We're always trying to measure up. You mentioned that you're a little bit of a perfectionist. Sometimes I find that with leaders, they're constantly trying to prove themselves, constantly. They take on more and more and more, and it's got to be just right, because if it's not just right, I'm not good enough. So, I'm not good enough is a huge theme that goes into our image, that tiny little ego, that little voice saying, you're not chosen because you're not good enough yet. You're not pretty enough. You're not smart enough. You're not thin enough. You're not healthy enough. You're not enough. I always have to prove myself. That's a fun little game we love playing with ourselves. The ego is like, well, show them that you're capable. Make everyone see, because again, maybe you're not good enough. So I always have to prove myself to be worthy. And it's like, again, it's a story. You're going to tell it to yourself. And guess what? The circumstances are going to keep showing up because you're still playing the game. I'm better than them. You talked about this in what you just said. This is the spiritual world, the religious world, whatever it is. It's, I've got this going on, so I'm sitting up here. I'm better than you. I know better. And it's that whole conundrum of judgment that gets us locked in. And I'm just going to spoil it for you. Whatever you're judging is your own insecurity. That's your ego saying, oh, I have this in me and I don't like it, but I see it in you. So I'm going to make you the target because I'm too vulnerable. I have to keep everyone happy. You are responsible for the whole world, the people pleasing. I have to keep all these delicate balls that I juggle effortlessly suspended in the air so none of them break or bounce or fall. It's a martyr type of a thing. And again, the ego does it because it's the story that you live. We find this a lot with the wives and the moms where they run around and self-sacrifice to keep everyone happy. It's the ego saying
Mhm.
that's how I'm accepted.
And all of us have autoimmunity and are not doing
Right.
very well right
Talk about
now.
a
Like,
misalignment, right? We forget who we are. One of these is really meaningful to me. My ego likes to play with this one. People always leave me. And this one has, in fact, this was part of my hypnosis session with you of a very early childhood thing. And it was abandonment. And it was one I hadn't really considered had been part of it, but it's sort of been my thing all my life. And my ego really is cautious about friendships or anything else because it is trying to protect me. Like, oh, don't get too close. Don't share too much. Don't be vulnerable because people always leave you. People always leave you and then you're crushed. And guess what? I've relived the story over and over again. It's one of my greatest lessons. And I tell you, that one's a tough one. We all have them. This is another one I see a lot in business. Success means I'm worthy. We are competing against everybody instead of being in this lane of creation. We're in competition because we have defined our success based on what we see somebody else embodying. So that might be, I've fallen in this trap. Great story. When I first started my business in 2019 in consulting, I was just kind of muddling through, what does this look like? I didn't really know. And that's how it goes. You don't really know. I didn't have a lot of structure to it yet. I knew what I was good at. And I met with this other coach. She had been doing it for a while and she had one of those office sharing spaces. And so I came in and they have a receptionist and I said who I was there to meet. And I'm I showed up wearing leggings and some boots and like a tunic and a sweater. I'm very casual, like t-shirts. I'm very casual. And so I'm sitting there waiting for this gal, and she comes out in a red power suit. 2 minutes late, she comes out. She's got a blonde mohawk, bright red lipstick, and a red power suit. And I sat with her, and she dominated the whole room. Like, good for her. But I left thinking, where do I go get a power suit? Because I'm not a coach. I'm not anybody unless I have that. That one tripped me up a lot, but that was my ego playing with my sense of who I was. So
mhm.
these examples are meant to give you that feeling of, what is the story that I'm running right now? What is the story that I keep telling myself? I just did a class on this. Become a pattern detector. What is the story you continue to live in? Because that's where you can dig. That's where you can uncover. Share, share with people. Talk about it. Talk about it. And ask other people what their input is, maybe what they see. This is just an act of vulnerability. Like, I could probably go to Angie and say, okay, Angie, What am I not seeing about myself? What is something you see me doing consistently or saying, or a lesson I keep learning? If you can do that with somebody else, you might get some information that you might not be able to tap into on your own. So ask yourself, what is the story? And then if you're feeling brave, ask somebody else the story they see.
It's so interesting because we can't see our own blind spots, and that's what I think is so fascinating was, when I'll just dive into a quick story about the power of blind spots was, again, my first coach, it was transformational to work with someone who understood the mind. And there were a lot of blind spots coming up, including the victimhood I had, how I was very much in the belief that I couldn't leave my nursing job because it was stable, because I was the breadwinner. And what would I do? I have all these, people to support, yada, yada. So thereby I was a victim of the golden handcuffs of corporate America, like so many people feel. And I will just say to those who are listening, if you're not, if you're in a field you don't want to be in and you want to start a business and you're terrified, we were not rich. My husband was a teacher. So people, I think, have this assumption that, oh, it must have been nice. Like you must have had money. No, honeys. I saved a lot for a few years to be able to do what I did. There was no trust fund baby in here. So, just a little gentle love kick in the ass to get going for you. But what happened in this coaching experience that was even more of an epiphany was, I was kind of learning about the victimhood, the choice I had in life, and all the choices that I didn't realize I had in front of me. So that was empowering. I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm the problem the whole
Mhm.
time. It's me. Huh. Cool. All right. Now I can change it. Well, there was a point where I don't recall the exact conversation, but I got super triggered by something the coach said. And he was calling me out on some shit. And I was very just like, F that. Like, what a dick, and I just like went into complete anger. I shut down and I hopped off the call and I was just freaking fuming. And I was just going through the process. My ego was very upset about whatever had happened. Again, I don't recall the exact specifics, but I remember thinking, I need to go back and watch the replay because I wonder if maybe there's something I'm missing. So I go back. Everything that I thought happened did not happen the way I thought it happened. My ego went into complete defense mode and made up this whole scenario of like what I thought went down. Well, in that moment, I recognized a pattern that I've had since I was a child that when I get triggered, I shut down. Like I go into that freeze, like shut down state. What did I do in that exact moment when I was triggered? I shut down and I was unable to even like function. And I was like, oh my God. So then I could see, that I do that everywhere I go when I'm triggered. And so, they say how you do one thing is how you do everything. Well, when Ange was triggered, Ange would shut down in all these different areas and just kind of bypass essentially, or just ignore situations or not have to circle back. So, anyways, that was something that had that not happened, I would have never known. But also, I was reflective enough to be like, maybe there's more to this story, like than what my brain is telling me. So here's the thing, your brain, sorry, is kind of full of bullshit. It's feeding you things based on perception. Perception is not reality. So remember, how you perceive things is not 100% truth. So, anyways, I thought that was such an interesting experience that I hope people that are listening also have those mind blowing moments of like, oh, that was the ego. Oh my God. Like, I didn't realize this was a pattern I've always had. So, speaking of ego, how can you tell when the ego is running the show? So, for me, I would shut down. That would be, how I would show up would be I would shut down. Another one is really kind of negative emotions, essentially. All of that, and even positive emotions. Even the desire to pay it forward in the Starbucks line is an ego. That's your ego because you feel good making somebody else feel good. It's not selfless. Sorry, it's not. And that was something I was like, well, why? I just want to help people. Well, why? So that I can feel good because I help people. That's the reality. That's why we do nice things. It's from ego. I'm not saying all of it is completely ego, but examine your reasons for why you do even positive things. So on the negative side, anger is a huge egoic sign, and it often is a mask for our insecurities or fears that we have. Defensiveness really comes up as a way to protect ourselves. So that's also ego. It wants to protect you. Insecurity. which again comes back to that fear of being rejected. Your fear of not being a part of the tribe comes up as an insecurity. Pride, as we mentioned. And oh my God, another example is saw during COVID, the pro vaxxers versus the anti vaxxers and the egoic war that happened. That's still happening. I still see people posting about that. And I'm like, brother, it's been 5 years. Can we just drop this already? Like, like people are really in their ego and in their pride about these things. Anxiety, too, as we mentioned with myself, that was a huge way that I cultivated this like identity to cope with the world to try to keep myself safe. So any anxiety you have is all egoic. And then resentment. So I held a lot of resentment for a lot of things that happened earlier in my life and in some relationships. And I played the martyr card real well. Like I was the number one victim in that story, not realizing the choices I had in every single situation to reclaim my power. So if you feel victimized or you feel like resentful, you gotta examine where that's coming from. And again, tough love, like you're not a victim. So you can be you and I talked about this. You can be victimized, meaning someone does something to you, for sure, absolutely. But when you carry on the identity of a victim afterwards, that's a choice. And that's some harsh love. And I was that person. And I say that because I've been there. And I started to see how these things that happened to me weren't fair. They were not okay. But I carried the story on. And I just would tell everybody who would listen why it wasn't fair what happened to me and how it's made my life difficult. And I would be in a different situation if these things didn't happen, and financially I'd be better off if, and all this bullshit. And that was complete ego. So as I learned to begin to drop that, my life got a lot better.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, and what we're talking about here is the small self versus our true self. And you reflected on this in the book Mind Hacking Happiness. It's a really good book. I know Angie's referred to it a few times, and I'm loving it myself. So
those who are on YouTube, this is the book. It's fantastic by Sean Webb. So he has volume 1 and 2. Get
yeah,
volume 1 to start because it really builds foundational content for volume 2, which is a lot more esoteric. It's very deep and spiritual conversations, but it's
yeah, break the ice
phenomenal. So
first
please
with the
get the
first one.
book.
It's really
Yeah.
good. So our small self, if you think of it like the child. I can identify almost with pinpoint accuracy when my small self is driving the car. I just had an incident last week or the week before where I actually turned to somebody and I said, "Stop talking to me like I'm a child." And I'm like, "Oh, that's my that's my small self." So it's reactive, it's fear-based, it's conditional. Think of it just, when we're tiny little kids, our ego really plays a very important role because we don't have what we need yet to sustain life. Not at all. So we have to have that sense of our ego in order to be able to stay alive, to have care, food, shelter, love, that kind of thing. But that small self, they still live in there. And so it can be very reactive. It's that stop talking to me like a child reaction that I was like, oh my gosh, that just came out of my mouth. Um, Fear based. It's all the what ifs. It's conditional. I think it's helpful for me if I can stay in my right frame of mind. If I can look at other people that I'm witnessing doing any of those things and really just picture them as a scared child who is afraid of not surviving whatever that moment is. It is helpful. It doesn't mean that you have to continue to be a doormat. You don't. I think of the book, by Mel Robbins, Let Them, and it's the let them, let me kind of a concept. So that's small self. Now, your true self, you'll know it when you feel it. You're going to just know it because it feels really good. It's very expansive. So if you think of your small self, it feels claustrophobic. It feels like you're just kind of caged in. Oftentimes, the feeling I get is that I'm stuck in a corner being attacked and I have nowhere to go. It's very small, it's very tight, it's very constricting. But my true self feels very open armed. It feels like breath. It feels solid and grounded, it feels very free. And it's a beautiful feeling. In the world I live in, it's alignment, it's flow, it's feeling the synergy of it. And it doesn't always mean something really great is happening to you. It just means that you're in your truest essence. And so that is your true self. So those are good indicators. If you're feeling constricted, you had mentioned like shutting down, that's your small self. I get very short of breath. I feel air hungry. That's my small self. That's those reactive things, chemicals and everything kind of hitting my body simultaneously. So if we're thinking about it from how do we reframe, because we talk a lot about we can rewire these patterns, so we can look at these situations without shame or guilt, and we can reframe them. So even asking yourself out loud, how can I get love right now? And the true self will always identify with I am love. So if we're in our small self and we're feeling reactive and we're reaching out for all these things and we just feel like we're closing in, you can even ask, how can I get love right now? And remind yourself that your true self is love. We are love. That is what we're designed in. And that's that expansive energy.
And that is, every emotion, right? How can I get comfort? I can find it inside. Okay. Whew. And, I was talking with somebody recently about even just the consumeristic nature of our society. And that's very egoic. Like, I need to have all these things. I need to get my dopamine hits. I need to buy the shiniest, newest, whatever things. And people are in crisis with these tariffs. And, if you're listening to this years from now, you might be like, what happened? Like, but we're in the throes of these like potential tariff wars. And people are really getting freaked out about the consumeristic cost of goods. Now, while I understand, yes, that's going to hit some people's pockets, probably all of ours to some extent. However, what if that's also like God being like, hey, y'all, go inside, stop looking elsewhere
Mm.
for your peace, for your happiness? What if all you really needed was the house over your head, your food, and your very basic supplies? And I don't identify, when people are freaking out about this, I don't identify with it because I don't like shopping. I don't get into that. I get very just like I like my peace at home and I like my little sanctuary I have. And yeah, sometimes it's fun to buy something new and shiny, but I think for so many, this is almost like an attack on the ego of so you can either take more credit cards out and continue to live leveraging your life, or maybe have some self-control, go
Mhm.
inward and start to say, what is that giving me that I don't think I can find inside? And I thought about that a lot, even, back in the days when I would drink a lot of wine. It was like I wanted comfort. I wanted to feel calm and I wanted to just kind of drown out the stress I was dealing with. And that was a part of another ego death was I was seeking these outside things for the work I was being called to do inward. So for everybody, if you're saying I need love or I don't have a good relationship or this, it's a call that you have to fix that aspect within you first. And so, you're not broken. And I will say that 10,000 times over. You're just beginning to release the crap that doesn't suit you at this point in your journey. So I would encourage all the listeners, anybody who's really wanting to dive into the ego work, to just kind of in the next week or so observe your reactions to things, right? And that, usually it's an emotional reaction, and just tap in and be like, all right, what's it trying to protect me from? Being wrong? Well, what would it mean if I was wrong? Well, then I'm not perfect. Well, what would it mean if I'm not perfect? Well, then
Huh.
things could come crashing down. Right? There's always more what if questions you can ask yourself. Or if for me, example, when I get angry with my partner, it's usually because I don't feel heard. I'm like, you're not understanding me, don't feel heard. And, we can have great conversations and come back to ourselves and each other at the end of it. But in the triggers and when we're both in our ego, it's usually something along the lines, I don't feel heard, I don't feel respected, I don't feel appreciated, whatever. So as you get triggered, just wonder within yourself, what what's beneath that. And then too, as you beautifully said, Jess, like, is this coming from my true self, that bigger S self, or is it coming from my ego? Ego is tight, constricted, little. true self is expansive and joyful and without attachment. And it just feels good, and you're just being, and that's an interesting place to find. It's so cool when you can tap into that. And again, it can be as simple as you're going on a walk, or, I imagine you going on a horse ride, like you're in flow, you're in that state. Sometimes it's me with my kids, just like seeing their joy. We went hiking yesterday and waterfalls and all this fun stuff, and just seeing my little one just so immersed in the moment, so curious. It was the essence of being. And I was so joyful, like, wow, even though humaning can be hard, how beautiful is my life that I get to be here with these people and like have this time. So there's a lot of joy. And, the more we can just kind of put things into perspective, the more you really can live in that state, and it can be a permanent thing you can tap into. And that's, I think, the point of all of this, right? Is that reaching up, people get triggered by the word enlightenment, but it's the reaching of enlightenment. We say spiritual awakening, but at the end, it's becoming enlightened. It's remembering who we are, that we were never separate from God, and that, we get to have all that now, all that beauty, all that grace, all that just incredible
Yeah,
love.
we get the whole experience. And it does take practice. A lot of this, if you're coming from somewhere where you're realizing that you've been in your ego and that story a lot and you're running those programs, you'll have to take the time to practice a new program. And so I'll just say meditation is a great way to do that, where you can tap into the other expansive feelings, and it just helps your brain realize that can be a familiar pattern too, and then you'll start to tune into that more around you and your stories change. This is not work that's about shaming the ego. Our ego is important, and again, this is about balance. It's about becoming aware of it, because self-awareness is our superpower. So become the pattern observer. And in the observer, we're not the pattern judger. We're not judging our patterns. We're not shaming it. We're just building this gap between the ego and that expansive part. And we're saying, okay, what do we get to do in here? Because that's where freedom lives. That's true freedom, which the ego is also scared of, by the way. So we want to just really test that. And in our next episode, we're going to talk about just how to release the ego attachment a little bit, and maybe some of the stuff that happens as some of our older, not needed at this moment in time, identities start to fall away. Um, a lot of things will start to kind of set into their place, but there's a process that happens, and again, it'll happen multiple times over, and it doesn't look the same all the time. But I know Angie and I both have some great stories to share about that, because it's a ride.
It is. And as you said, like this is not something that's happened overnight. You've been doing this work for many, many, many years. I've been with with intention doing this work for about 6 years or so, like really deep kind of spiritual work for about 5 or 6 years. And so this is not an overnight thing. This is a continual practice of just becoming aware, and those levels of awareness grow deeper and deeper. So there is no competition to enlightenment. There is no competition to becoming the most self-aware human that is on this planet. It's your own particular journey. And, even as you mentioned just before we wrap up about the patterns, you identified your patterns really well. I've identified some of mine. I know I have more I'm still not aware of. Again, it's like, they're blind spots for all of us. But look at some of the themes in your life and become aware. If you continually have problems with relationships, that could be a pattern to explore. What within me is creating this out there, right? Or, maybe you date the same type of person and they're just not great, and you had these failed experiences. Or you struggle to have a relationship with your children. Maybe your parents had that with you, so look at just some of the, even just the big, the big fish first. Those are the most obvious things. And again, how is there the things that make your life kind of hellish? Those are patterns created probably by you, within you, somehow, for acknowledgement. And then you start to do that refinement work. And I would say you and I are really in that phase of, we've kind of done the heavy lifting, and now we're in that refinement phase of there's things that are still coming up, but they're not the boulders that they were. They're like small pebbles that we're kind of parsing through, and it gets easier. So the initial part of this journey is intense. You know, the ego is going to be freaking fighting you tooth and nail. And next week, or maybe the week after, we'll talk about some wild experiences I had recently that just tripped me up. And I was like, holy shit, that was ego. Wow. Like that's intense. So, you know, it's such an interesting ride. And, you know, you always listeners, you always have Jess and I at any point to talk to, or even just like text message or email, because we know that this is not for the faint of heart, and building a like-minded community of people around you that are, you know, like-hearted, like-minded on the same path is really critical to our growth. You know, we don't grow in isolation. It really is that having somebody who can kind of be with you on the journey as just someone to be
Yeah.
reflective with, you know, and have these kind of conversations with. So thanks for tuning in. I'm super excited for our next episode when we're going to dive even deeper. And as always, please reach out if you have questions, if you want us to talk about a certain topic even more. We are happy with any feedback you
Yeah. Thanks
provide.
again, guys. We'll see you next time.
See ya.